Hello, Queensland Storyteller Time. I'm Kim Dodsworth. Today's author, Pat Barron, was born in New Zealand in 1919. She started her writing career at the age of 8 with a collection of poems. She moved to Australia in 1956. Now Pat is well into her 90s, but her muse is still alive and well, and she has many published short stories and poems to her credit. As well as writing, Pat is interested in swimming, and until recently she competed in races with the Masters Games. Pat, it's an honour to be asked to read your story today, The Mandarin Tree. When Grandad came to live with us, he brought his window box. We all went over to his flat in the high-rise Housing Commission block to help him pack. Des had stayed down below with the ute just in case someone should take a fancy to Grandad's things. Luckily, he was only on the 5th floor, but that was high enough, seeing the lift had broken down. We'd made our last trip, or so we thought, and were waiting for him to come down when Mum spotted him out on his tiny balcony. He was pointing to his window box. Dad groaned. Then he took a hammer and he and Des went up. I watched them sweating and straining as they came down the last flight with Grandad following, telling them not to jolt the box. We all helped heave it up into the back of the ute, and then Grandad started to climb in after it. But Mum said no. With a cold wind blowing, it could bring on his chest complaint again. There wasn't room in the cabin for us all, so Des and I sat in the back. Just as we were leaving, a kid leaned out a window and yelled, "So long, old-timer!" I'm glad he did, because Grandad had been there for 14 years, and it would have been sad if no one had said goodbye. Grandad waved, and we were off. Back home, there was the job of getting all the stuff out of the ute and into his room. You could see he wanted to be no bother, because he said he'd sleep up in the little attic room, but Mum said no. With his heart, she was not going to have him climbing that steep staircase. Des had put his stuff up in the attic already, and the downstairs room by the kitchen was made up, so there were no arguments. I was glad I wasn't the one that had to shift to the attic. It was a spooky place. Tenants who'd lived there before us had left their junk behind, and there was everything you can imagine. An old broken-down cot, books, clothes, and a big picture of St. Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland. They couldn't have been protected like they are here. Grandad settled in pretty well. I was at school and the others went out to work. When we got home at nights, we'd find he'd done the odd bit of shopping and the potatoes were peeled. The only problem was where to put his window box. It was one of those old houses that have a narrow veranda with an iron railing, and then you're on the street. The backyard was a pocket handkerchief-sized piece of pavement with just enough room for the dunny. In the end, we'd put his window box on the veranda, and Dad put some bricks under it to lift it up a bit. Grandad said that when spring came, it would be a picture with petunias, cinerarias, and polyanthus. Sometimes I'd watch him working on it, watering, weeding, and loosening the soil here and there. Then one Saturday morning, he asked Dad to take him round to Byer's nursery to pick up something. Mum and I went along too, and it was just as well we did, because after he'd been inside a few minutes, 2 men brought out a really big tree in a pot. Dad gave a bit of a gasp. "Where's it going?" "In the ute." "Yes, but after?" "On the other side of the veranda." After we'd swung it up with a fair bit of difficulty, it was decided I'd sit beside it and steady it as well as I could. "Is it a lemon, Grandad?" "No, Debbie. And it's not an orange either. Remember the book you got me from the library?" "Oh, a Mandarin." Dad drove slowly and I managed to keep it upright. When we got home, there was the problem of getting it out and onto the veranda. But I must say that when we'd got it set up and Grandad had put a rope around it and tied it to the rail, it looked rather fine. Mandarin Imperial, the label said, and I started thinking about Grandad, who had worked all his life in a shoe factory, until it somehow got swallowed up and we all started wearing imported shoes. And always he must have wanted to grow things. Well, he was free to do it now, but there was just no place to put them. The tree had lots of little green marbles, baby mandarins that might one day grow and ripen. I used to look at it as I started off to school. Very slowly the fruit started to get bigger, and then a faint orange tinge appeared in two of them. "It won't be long now," he kept saying. Then one morning, just before breakfast, he came into the kitchen with such a look on his face. "What's up, Grandad?" He didn't say anything, just led us up out onto the veranda. Where the biggest and brightest piece of fruit had been, there was only a stem that held a little piece of peel. Last night someone must have had a feast and taken flesh, pips, peel and all without actually picking the fruit. "Possums," said Des. "That'd be right." Although this was in a city, there was a park close by. Grandad looked over his tree. Only one mandarin was gone, but soon there'd be no more. Then what he said really surprised me. "I wonder how they liked it. Pretty much judging by what's left. If we're ever going to eat any of them, there's just one thing for it. I'll have to sleep out here and keep the possums off." Then Mum, as I expected she would, said no very firmly. Not on any account was he to sleep out on the veranda. It'd be far too cold, also it wasn't safe to sleep out. But she had another idea. "Each night we'll carry the tree inside, and then in the morning put it back here again so it'll get the sun." It sounded silly, but it worked. That night Des and I did it. We faced each other across the pot and staggered into the house with Grandad going ahead opening doors. We set it up in a big flat dish Mum had put in the living room, and there we sat, all five of us and the mandarin tree, watching TV. And so the tree became part of our family, and I used to fantasize about it a bit. What programs did it like? It must hate watching logging. In the morning there was often a rush, but Grandad made sure the tree went out. All this shifting about didn't seem to upset it. The fruit were growing big and getting ripe. Of course people laughed a bit. An orchard in the living room. How many more was he going to get? But at the same time you could see they were interested, and one had to admit that, although things were a bit crowded, it did look rather ornamental. Then one evening we were just finishing pudding when Grandad said, "I want you all to come into the living room." So we left the dishes and all trooped in after him. Grandad sat in the easy chair, the good one, in front of the little table where he'd put 2 saucers and a pair of clippers. Des sat on the wobbly chair that had to be wedged in the corner, Mum and Dad on the couch, and me on the footstool. When we were all settled, the old chap got up and went over to the tree and cut off the biggest and ripest looking of the mandarins. He peeled it into one saucer and arranged the segments in the other. Then he offered them around, Mum, Dad, me, and finally Des. "Not at all bad," Dad announced. "Juicy," Mum said. "Really juicy." Des stood up and held out his hand for more, and that spoke for itself. "It's so sweet," I said. "Sweetest I've ever had." Grandad didn't say anything, but I could see his face. I've never known anyone look so happy. And that was The Mandarin Tree by Pat Barron. I hope you'll join me again this time next week when I'll have another short story of quality for you. I'm Kim Dodsworth, the program Queensland Storyteller.
Bent or broken, it's the family tree. Bent or broken, it's the family tree. Each branch a part of a part of me. This is my tree, and it's a beautiful tree. Dwarf or giant, it's the family tree. Dwarf or giant, it's a family tree. Growing just as tall as it was meant to be. This is your tree, and it's a beautiful tree. What a beautiful tree. What a beautiful tree. What a beautiful tree. What a beautiful it's a beautiful tree. What have